There were 5 mortal men to whom we gave immortality. Throughout the decade of the 1960s, they worked their special magic on us and left us spellbound. They made the squares feel hip, and even the cool cats were warmed by their presence.
I'd like to introduce my bookmaker. He's way in the back there.
They helped put an end to racial segregation in America by laughing bigotry out of existence. Like Pied Pipers, they led us out of the doldrums of the 1950s into the new frontier of a young president. 5 men who never even finished high school taught us that talent could overcome every disadvantage. In return, we gave them a license to break all of the rules we had to follow, spend all of the money we would never earn, party all night with the beautiful broads, and sleep late every morning. Live for us, we said. Live the lives we would live if we were talented, rich, and handsome. Be outrageous. Because of you, the world is no longer a dreary place.
Spin around for Bubby, spin around for Bubby, spin around for Daddy, and now make a big finish for Zadie. Now sit down, wait a minute, Sam. He didn't make Patchy kick.
The press tagged them the Rat Pack, and the name stuck. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, and the man who put it all together, Frank Sinatra, threw us a party that lasted 10 years.
Everybody hates a smart ass.
And there hasn't been one like it since.
You stood right in my eyes, Frank.
We revisit the glory days of Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack, a time in our history that many of us would like to get back to, if we could just find a roadmap. Hollywood, California, 1950. The story of the Rat Pack begins here, at the home of legendary actor Humphrey Bogart. Nearly every night, Bogey, the king of the movie tough guys, would invite a select group of friends over to drink and talk shop. Top stars like Judy Garland, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, David Niven, and director John Huston were regulars. As the evenings wore on, the conversation invariably turned to the same ugly subject, the tyranny of the studio system. Back then, virtually every actor, director, and writer worked under contract to one of the major studios. If they wanted to keep their jobs, they were expected to take their assignments without question. The arrogance of studio bosses like Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner infuriated Bogart, who was determined to call his own shots. Bogart and his friends began handing scripts back and demanding an active role in their own careers. Out of frustration, the studio bosses named them the Rat Pack. Bogart selected as president of the Rat Pack a young man whom he considered to have all of the attributes of a leader: fearlessness, unbridled ego, and above all, supreme talent. His name was Frank Sinatra.
Bogart was the founder, and he was the leader, obviously, even though Frank was Mr. President. And I think that this idea of defiance, of being the rebel, of being different, Frank really accepted into his conscious behavior. That became his way of life. And he, obviously, from Bogey, you know, to defy, to be different, to tell somebody to go to hell, to tell somebody, to be your own boss. You don't take orders, you give orders.
The irony was not lost on Frank Sinatra that a celluloid gangster should offer him the same advice he had been given a dozen years before by the genuine article. Paul Skinny D'Amato was born in Atlantic City, New Jersey in 1909.
Skinny started gambling at 10 years of age. He had crap games on corners, empty houses, schoolyards, and he made the money because he had the dice and the cards. So finally, when he became older, his uncle lent him $40 to open up this cigar store, and that's how he started. They had a pool room in the back, and they had gambling. The cigar store was just a front. But he had many cigar stores and joints. At 16 years old, he had about 15 places all over Atlantic City. He was really an entrepreneur at an early age. He catered to pickpockets, thieves, gamblers, prostitutes, madams, you name them. So, and the mob. So they said to him, why do you cater to the mob? He says, I don't ask favors from them. He says, besides, it's like having the United States Army behind you.
Before there was a Las Vegas, there was Atlantic City, America's first playground. By day, Atlantic City was the clean, fun capital of America. A haven of sun, surf, and saltwater taffy. Its world-famous boardwalk was the stage for countless parades and beauty contests, including the annual Miss America pageant. Swarms of tourists scrambled over each other just to get a good look at the latest outrageous attraction. Men boxed kangaroos and lost. Cats boxed each other with gloves in a miniature ring. A woman dove off a 40-foot tower into a water tank on horseback. But after the sun went down, Atlantic City shed its mantle of innocence and went out to raise a little hell. On Kentucky and Missouri avenues, nightclubs, bars, and restaurants offered the best in food, drink, and entertainment. In 1939, 24-year-old Frank Sinatra came to Atlantic City for the first time to play the Steel Pier Casino with the Harry James Band. By then, Skinny D'Amato, a born showman with a keen eye for talent, had fought his way up from the streets to become manager and part owner of the most popular spot in town, the 500 Club.
Sinatra used to perform at the Steel Pier, and then he'd come in the club sometimes with Harry James, and Betty Grable would be there too. But Sinatra was very nice, well-mannered, pleasant to everyone. And when he'd ask for a drink or food, and Skinny said, I have something to tell you. Important men do not ask, they order. So Skinny sort of molded his character, Sinatra's character, how to behave.
A friendship developed between Skinny D'Amato and Frank Sinatra that would last a lifetime. It was the kind of loyalty that Frank would never receive from anyone in Hollywood or the music industry, and certainly not from the press. In December of 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and the United States ended World War II. What lay ahead were 4 long, bitter, and painful years. How and why Frank Sinatra came to be the one to see America through them can be explained in only one way. He answered a need in all of us. Whenever Sinatra sang to an audience, he literally bared his soul. No popular singer had ever before brought that kind of emotional intensity to a live performance. Throughout the lonely days and nights of World War II, while American GIs were fighting overseas, their sweethearts flocked to hear Frank Sinatra, who touched them as no one else could. He gave voice to their disappointments, as well as to their sense of life's impermanence and fragility. His genius for interpretation and phrasing, and above all, his overwhelming charisma, bonded his fans to him to the point of obsession. America had launched its first superstar.
When I knew that Sinatra was in town, I would sneak in the back with all the girls running. I would be the only guy in the middle running into the Paramount Theater, get in for nothing. And I would sit there, and I didn't understand, because I was a young kid, what they were screaming at. I couldn't hear his voice that well. And you look, I said, what, skinny kid, why? I couldn't believe it, why? I thought they were sorry because he was skinny, that maybe he didn't have a sandwich, maybe he didn't eat this guy. And I'm saying maybe there's something wrong, because he was not an attractive man in those days. His jaw was sunken in. The girls were screaming, Frankie, we love you, Frankie, we love you. It went on and on. And I went, wow. Is that show business? Maybe they gotta like you because you're skinny and you look depressed and the girls wanna help you. Everybody wants to mother him. I think that might have been maybe a fact. They wanted to mother him. I said, gee, this guy needs a dish of macaroni, for crying out loud. I thought it was a terrible thing that maybe they were abusing this guy. But he just stood there, he had his hands like this here in the mic, and he was singing, long ago and far, whatever the heck he was saying, all or nothing at all. And they would sing, it's Frankie, Frankie, baby, and I'm going, what?
For Frank Sinatra, the war years proved to be the best of times. Rejected for military service due to a punctured eardrum, he was free to remain stateside, earning huge sums of money. While his millions of fans were forced to count ration stamps and wait online for hours to buy food and gasoline, Sinatra enjoyed the life of a family man. He bought his wife Nancy a beautiful home in New Jersey and showered gifts on his firstborn child, Nancy, the true love of his life. The Sinatras wanted for nothing. They even drove their own Chrysler convertible, but nobody seemed to care. In a country that had lost its men, Frank Sinatra filled the void. He was every woman's man. In 1941, Frank Sinatra was headlining with the Tommy Dorsey Band at the Michigan Theater in Detroit. On the same show, opening for the Dorsey Band, was a black song and dance act called the Will Maston Trio, featuring a 16-year-old spark plug named Little Sammy. Sammy Davis had been performing with his dad and his uncle for more than 13 years. his autobiography, Davis recalled his first meeting with Frank Sinatra in the following words. He came up to me backstage and he said, "Hi, I'm Frank, and I sing with the Dorsey Band." Sammy Davis began his show business career at the tender age of 3. By the time he was 6, Sammy was already a top vaudeville star, making good money, money that his dad and his uncle, Will Maston, didn't want to give up. Instead of sending him home to live with his mother and go to school, they kept Sammy on the road with them.
One time I met them backstage, and Will Maston said to Sammy, and he was little, and said to Sammy, "This is your mother." And he looked up at Will and said, "I have a new mother every week."
Sammy never spent a single day in school, but he learned his craft from the most gifted and accomplished entertainers of the day. By the time he ran into Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis was a seasoned professional who had toured America from coast to coast 23 times. Sammy thought he'd seen every great performer there was to see until he heard Frank Sinatra sing for the first time that night at the Detroit Theater. Sammy Davis had never heard anything like it.
Saturday night is the loneliest night of the week. I sing the song that I sang for the memories I usually see, until I hear you at the door, until you're in my arms once more. Saturday night is the loneliest night of the week.
He's got feeling. He puts the feeling in on it. It makes the lyrics mean something. See, some singers ride the beat. Others lay off the beat. He can do either way. He can go 1, 2, 3, 4. When I was in heaven. Now the guy said, when I was in heaven. But Sinatra give you that thing, you know, that little phrasing. He's got the phrasing.
Frank Sinatra was equally impressed with Sammy Davis. In 1947, shortly after Sammy was honorably discharged from the Army, Sinatra chose the Will Maston Trio to open for him at New York's Capitol Theater for $1,250 a week. It was more money than we had ever seen in our lives, Sammy would later comment.
Sinatra knew the kid was talented, and he saw in the future. See, he says, now this guy's gonna be great one of these days. So he befriended him. You know, a guy like to feel like I discovered something. I saw a gem in this rough cut thing I saw found in the desert or wherever it was, you know.
Of all the top white performers, only Frank Sinatra had the guts to challenge the bald-faced racism that sought to keep Davis buried on the Chitlin circuit and out of the big time.
Nobody but Frank Sinatra could have put Sammy Davis where he was. Frank Sinatra, first was never a racist kind of a guy. He cared about everybody being equal. Frank Sinatra put the holy roly on this man because Frank Sinatra knew this is a great talent. And in order for this man to present it to the American public with all the racism going on, when Frank said this guy is great, they all paid attention.
Thus began Sammy Davis's rise to stardom. From then on, Frank Sinatra would be at his side every step of the way, ready to go to the wall for his buddy, whom he lovingly nicknamed Smokey. In 1944, Frank Sinatra signed a motion picture contract with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios. and moved his growing family to Hollywood. Shortly after joining MGM, Sinatra was invited to a party at the home of studio head Louis B. Mayer. It was there that he met a handsome young actor named Peter Lawford. Sinatra and Lawford were the only two young guys at the party and took an instant liking to each other. At 29, Frank Sinatra was looking forward to a career as a dramatic actor at a major studio. 21-year-old Peter Lawford, however, had been under contract at MGM for 2 years and was well on his way to becoming a leading man.
When Frank came to MGM, I think, well, certainly in the beginning, that Peter was a bigger star than Frank.
A free spirit who spent most of his time at the beach, Lawford would always be regarded as something of an oddball by the Hollywood community. Peter Lawford was born in 1923, the illegitimate child of Sir Sidney Lawford and Mrs. May Allen, the wife of one of his staff officers. The scandal eventually forced the Lawfords to leave England. For most of his childhood, Peter lived a nomadic life, traveling about Europe and the Far East with his parents. Eventually, they settled in Palm Beach, Florida, as house guests of the American nouveau riche, who were eager to show off their blue-blood English guests. But by 1939, Lord and Lady Lawford had worn out their welcome and lost all of their money. Cast aside by their society friends, they moved into a shabby rented bungalow on the wrong side of the tracks in West Palm Beach. At 16 years of age, Peter Lawford should have been a junior in high school. Instead, he became the family breadwinner, parking cars at a local garage for $25 a week. While on the job, Peter, who was totally naive to American racism, struck up a close friendship with his two co-workers, both of whom were black. One day, a wealthy client saw Peter sitting under a tree with his new buddies, eating sandwiches and playing cards. Outraged, he complained to the parking lot owner that it was a disgrace to see a good-looking white boy fraternizing with two coloreds. Lawford was almost fired. That man was Joseph P. Kennedy. 15 years later, Kennedy would become Peter Lawford's father-in-law. In 1942, May Lawford borrowed some money from a friend and moved the family to Hollywood in the hope of getting her handsome son into the movies. Luckily for Peter, most of Hollywood's leading young actors were away, fighting in World War II. Louis B. Mayer, realizing the need for English actors for his studio's wartime movies, took one look at Peter Lawford and immediately signed him to a contract with MGM. May Lawford was determined to control her son's career. When MGM rejected her demand that she be hired as Peter's manager, she went directly to Louis B. Mayer and told him that her son was a homosexual who needed supervision.
Peter was a victim of his mother, who wanted to really be Lady Lawford.
Peter definitely had a certain, quote, something. He was very popular in terms of fan mail and all of that, and he was a doggone good actor. And he brought a Cary Grant kind of suaveness to his roles.
By the time Frank Sinatra reported for work at MGM, Peter Lawford was receiving thousands of fan letters each week. Because he disguised it so well, Lawford's fans never noticed that he had a deformed right arm, the result of a childhood accident.
What happened?
Like Sinatra, Lawford was also 4F, but he often played the part of a soldier. During World War II, Peter Lawford served in the private army of Louis B. Mayer.
Laddie, you get bigger, but you never grow up.
He flew countless missions over enemy territory without ever leaving the ground. With Lassie as his co-pilot, Lawford fought the good fight on the MGM backlot. Uncle Sam had drafted most of MGM's young actors, leaving the studio filled with an abundance of available young actresses. Peter Lawford and Frank Sinatra were like kids in a candy store. Lawford was a bachelor, but Sinatra was very much married. Still, he didn't let that interfere with his romantic pursuits. After a long day on a set, Sinatra and Lawford often made the rounds of the best Hollywood nightclubs in the company of MGM's most beautiful women. In 1946, Peter Lawford was in the midst of a torrid love affair with a sultry actress named Ava Gardner.
Ava was, in my book, a true beauty. Ava would come in a shirtwaist and skirt, and no stockings, kick off the shoes. The feet were as beautiful as every other part of her.
In his early years at MGM, Frank Sinatra hardly noticed Ava Gardner, embroiled as he was with Hollywood's reigning queen, Lana Turner.
Lana Turner was signed to MGM. That's where I first taught Lana to walk down the stairs in Ziegfeld Girl. Then I took her on the set where she was going to walk down those stairs, and nobody ever did it greater than she did.
3 years earlier, Lana Turner had broken Lawford's heart when she abruptly ended their romance. Now, the shoe was on the other foot. Frank Sinatra would dump Lana Turner after she insisted he divorce his wife Nancy and marry her.
I can see a steeple surrounded by people.
In 1946, Frank Sinatra and Peter Lawford made their first film together. It happened in Brooklyn. Sinatra expected great things from the picture. Already the most popular singer in America, he had been given a dramatic lead opposite Katherine Grayson, one of MGM's top stars.
About my coming in after midnight, do you?
Oh, of course not.
Good night, Danny. It's been a wonderful evening.
Gee, I guess we're going steady now, huh, hey?
His co-star, veteran showman Jimmy Durante, christened him Moonlight Sinatra. At the start of production, Peter Lawford was to have only a small speaking part.
You know, we gotta start rounding up a doll for you.
A doll?
A chick. Or as they was known in my youth, a sweet patootie.
Spending all my money for
But at the last minute, the director, hearing that Lawford did a mean jitterbug, gave him a dance number in the film.
You say you look too swell to be seen with me.
When the picture was released, the LA Times gave Frank Sinatra lukewarm reviews for his acting, while Peter Lawford's dance routine was hailed as a showstopper.
I think maybe people forget at that time how important he was. He really was a big star. He was the leading young man at MGM.
In 1948, Collier's magazine named Peter Lawford the most popular romantic lead in the movies. But behind the perfect face and debonair manner, Lawford was a man tormented by feelings of profound inadequacy. Unable to free himself from the chains of his parents' disgrace and the loss of a legitimate heritage, Peter Lawford would always be haunted by the demons of his childhood.
To me, that is a sadness, because Peter could have been what we call a really terrific leading man.
In that same year of 1948, Frank Sinatra fell madly in love with Ava Gardner. At that point, he distanced himself from Peter Lawford. For the next 20 years, their relationship would always be a raging storm, filled with battles over women, money, and power. In July of 1946, Frank Sinatra was just settling into his new life in Tinseltown. Back in Atlantic City, Frank's old pal, Skinny D'Amato, was about to give another Italian singer the biggest break of his life.
If you were willing.
28-year-old Dean Martin had been crooning his way around the nightclub circuit for 10 lackluster years.
Pity me.
A tough kid from a tough neighborhood in Steubenville, Ohio, Dean Martin first aspired to become a prize fighter, then a professional gambler, and after that, even a gangster. Dean was a familiar face to patrons of the less exclusive clubs in Times Square, where he'd be found most nights hustling gigs or hanging out with other performers, all waiting for their big break. Back then, his best friend and roommate was singer Sonny King.
Dean Martin and I lived together for 5.5 years at a place called the Bryant Hotel. In fact, they have a plaque, 616. We lived in room 616, and they said, this room was occupied by Dean Martin and Sonny King, who never paid the rent. We were both amateur fighters, boxers, you know, and we used to charge people $5 a piece, come and watch us fight up in the room. We'd get about 10 guys for $50. Dean had just had his nose fixed. So I hit him a shot in the ribs, and so the guy, bong, he made believe he had the end of the round. As I turned around, Dean gave me a shot in the back of the neck and the shoulder blade, and I went flying out the window, 6 floors up. Luckily, they were the old-fashioned shades. They were made out of iron, the blinds, the Venetian blinds, and I hung on to the Venetian blinds. And Dean was laughing, you know, kind-hearted Dean. He was laughing like hell, you know, and they finally pulled me up, but they scraped my whole chest coming up, and I was bleeding. And I tell you, I beat the hell out of him. So much so that the next week, he was supposed to open up the Hippodrome Theater in Baltimore, and I went in for him under the name of Dean Martin. But I couldn't sing in his keys because he was a baritone and I was a tenor. But I got fired.
In the spring of 1946, Sonny King introduced Dean Martin to a 19-year-old Jewish comic named Jerry Lewis.
Dean and I were walking along the street one day, and it was simple, nothing dramatic, you know. It was a simple thing, and Jerry says, "Hi, Sonny." Jerry always loved Dean Martin from afar. You know, he didn't know him personally. And I knew he wanted to meet Dean. So I said, "Come here, Jerry." "Jerry, this is Dean. Dean, this is Jerry Lewis. Hi, how you doing?" "Okay, how you doing?" "Good. Come on, join us. We're going to have a cup of coffee." And from then on, the rest was history.
In July, Dean Martin arrived in Atlantic City to play a one-week engagement at Skinny D'Amato's 500 Club. By sheer coincidence, Jerry Lewis had been working at the 500 Club for a week before Dean Martin arrived, but his act had not gone over well. His entire show was nothing more than an old vaudeville routine commonly known as the record act. Skinny D'Amato's partner, Irvin Wolfe, found Lewis's wild gyrations and the sheer volume of his records so irritating that he could barely stand to sit in the club when Lewis was performing.
Wolfie, he used to drink a bottle of King William IV every night. But boy, he didn't like Jerry Lewis at all.
By the time Dean Martin took the stage at the 500 Club, Skinny D'Amato had handed Jerry Lewis his walking papers.
Jerry was backstage packing his things, going back. And Dean was going to be the new star. And all of a sudden, they heard a crash of the platters and things like that. So Dean Martin, who was very fast, said, "I guess Jerry's packing all his records." You know? And Jerry heard that, and through anger, sometimes you can become funny. And he walked out, "I don't think that's very nice, Dean," you know? And the people started to laugh.
In spite of themselves, Dean and Jerry had stumbled across a routine that brought roars of laughter. Skinny D'Amato's instincts immediately took over, and he seized the moment.
Skinny, I think it was, said, "Hey, you two guys get together here. You don't know what the hell you're doing. If you don't like it, get out." And they got together and they got squirting soda at one another and blah, blah, blah. And that's where they met, and that's how it happened.
And before you know it, they had an act the next night. Do you know what they wrote it on? A paper bag, a brown paper bag. They wrote the act. Skinny D'Amato made Dean and Jerry a hit at Atlantic City.
As individuals, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis had never been able to achieve success. As a team, they were a phenomenon.
I'd have done that record pantomime the rest of my life. I wasn't looking for anything. After the first night he was on a stage with me, I knew we had lightning in a bottle and knew exactly what we had ahead of us.
For the next few weeks, the 500 Club was filled to overflowing. Outside on Missouri Avenue, hundreds of people waited online for hours to see Dean and Jerry.
I wouldn't have had any fame without Dean. I wouldn't have been there. He was the catalyst. He was the spine of this act. He had an infinite sense of comedy, particularly with the sense of timing he had, which was impeccable.
Next door to the 500 Club was Ferrara's Restaurant, a regular hangout for performers in their off hours.
Dean would sit off at the end of the bar with my girlfriend, and they would just talk and have a few drinks. He always had a smile on his face. He was always a happy-go-lucky looking fella and a handsome-looking man. And I mean, he was good-looking. He was good-looking. And he was always well-dressed. You never saw him, you know, like some guys, they're real ruggedy looking. He was always well-dressed and always soft-spoken, never boisterous, never loud. Jerry was younger, and I think Jerry followed him around because I think it was an idol for him, really, seriously. I think Jerry really saw this man as an idol, and I think it was a brother idol he saw in him. And for some reason or other, it was, Lewis went forward with Dean all the time, you know, always pushing himself with Dean, always pushing himself. And Dean, I guess because he was older, figured, hey, I don't need this, you know. And he would shy away from him, but I don't think Lewis was the kind that was going to shy away from him.
Early in 1948, Skinny D'Amato, eager to show off his protégés, brought Frank Sinatra to the Copacabana in New York City, where Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, now the toast of the town, were holding court. Frank joined Jackie Gleason and Fat Jackie Leonard, two giants of the Manhattan comedy scene, and with Jerry Lewis as head wacko, the five then proceeded to bring the house down. Still the most popular entertainer in America, and for the 5th year in a row, the top male vocalist on the downbeat charts, Sinatra, dazzled everyone in the room that night. Everyone, that is, except Dean Martin.
Frank was fascinated by Dean's arrogance. He was fascinated by Dean's arrogance. He never realized who Frank Sinatra was all his life. He never realized, that Frank was his older brother and his mentor. And, but Dean never thought of anybody like that.
Dean was only 2 years younger than Frank Sinatra. However, whereas Sinatra had achieved instant success, Martin had endured years of singing in Chinese restaurants and second-rate clubs before striking gold with Jerry Lewis.
Come on, get up. Don't be shy. Come on.
Within months, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis would sign a contract with Paramount Studios and move to Hollywood. For the next 8 years, their movies, television shows, and nightclub appearances would break all box office records.
Well, I hope you're satisfied with the way you embarrassed me. Look what the whole audience is staring at me.
Stare back at him. Now, better they stare at you. Here, get off the stage and take this with you.
For you're my Mary.
At long last, Dean Martin would be the rich and famous star he had always known he could be. Frank Sinatra, on the other hand, was about to embark on a romantic odyssey that would ultimately be his undoing. In the end, Sinatra would lose his family, his movie and recording contracts, and the loyalty of his fans, all for the love of a woman.